Alright, so here's the driver's side headlamp. Now, this is the high beam. This is the harness for the high beam, so this is going to get wrapped with electrical tape. Like I said, I'm using all the slim ballast because that ultra ballast is really big. I'd have to mount it externally, and I really don't think there's room under there to fit it. So what I have to do too is I have to run this outside of the headlight assembly, and I want to run it where the low beams are at. So the way I'm going to put this in, basically orient it like this so that this plug is coming out of here, and the two covers, like this cover will go back on, but this cover I'm going to have to cut a hole in it or something. I'm probably going to leave that for later. For right now, I'm just going to kind of leave this open just to get this going and probably finish this off later. But like I said, basically you're going to have this plug sticking out so it can be powered by the harness, so I can operate it independent of the switches in the car. So yeah, it's quite a packaging nightmare trying to get these in there, but I got them in the other one, so try to show you how that works. Alright, so here's a factory plug. Just got some electrical tape on there. This doesn't short out on anything. And then the other thing you have to do is they're going to actually cut these off of here. And I can't find my snips, so I've been using scissors. So basically what I did was just kind of chopped it in half and left the rest of this grommet on here. I mean, I could probably pull the rest off, but I'm just going to leave it on there. So this is off of the other bulb. I have to do the same thing to both of these. Get these wires off of here. So just going to separate them, chop it right down the middle of that. Alright, so here's the driver's side headlight. This is the top of the light. Have your turn signal over here. So the ballast for the high beam, I had the wires pointing towards the low beam, ran them back around, okay, because I need this plug to fit over here. Otherwise, it's probably just gonna run into the core support if I tried coming out of this hole with it. So that's why I have the ballast facing that way, so this will come out, be able to easily plug it in. The other ballast for the low beams is kind of tucked it up into the top of the assembly, and you're gonna have to screw around with snaking the wires around. Basically, put the ballast in with the bulbs out too. That's going to make it a lot easier. Get everything all situated. Snake your wires around, and then sneak those bulbs in. Make sure they fit in good. Now's the time to be double checking that. Make sure they got a nice snug fit. Everything's the way you want it to be. You don't want to go putting this back together and then having to pull it apart just to play around with the bulb not being seated right. So take the time to double check that. So yeah, like I said, I'll put these covers back on both of them, get them in there. The low beams will work right now, but I'm not going to have high beams until I get this harness straightened out. Alright, I got the headlights just kind of pushed back in there. I didn't finish it off. I just wanted to make sure that the headlights are working. So that looks like everything's cool. So just got to finish the ground. Gonna put a little bit of lithium grease, spray it on a paper towel, and use a Q-tip. Smear some on there. Put the ground wire on there. Put the bolt back in the fender. I'll have to disconnect the battery. Tap the hot lead into this fuse panel, and then the last thing I'll be wiring up the switch. And I believe the blue wire is ground, so the white wire on here is hot. Alright, so here's the power and the ground finished for the harness. Basically just took a Dremel tool, your safety glasses, and just kind of clearanced out the fuse box. So like I said, make sure you disconnect the power to the battery. take this bolt out. That's a 10 mil. Just kind of clearanced it, and now this will shut real nice. So I got power off of there. Ground's right there to the fender. All I need now is to wire up the switch to activate the high beams. Alright, so accomplished exactly what I wanted to do. I can run the high beams independent of the fog lights. Right now I've just got the fog lights jumped. So that's part of the harness that's going to get the switch, but I just jumped it really quick to test out the high beams. Yeah, that's the other thing too. You really want to test all this stuff to make sure it's working before you go cinching everything together. So now I know everything works, and all that's left is wiring a switch on to the on-off part of that wiring harness. Pretty cool. Run the high beams with the fog lamps now. Alright, so got this all finished up. I'll walk you guys through what I did to get it finished. In the other section, I said that I had the fog lights jumped on accident. What I really meant was that I had the high beams jumped. But anyways, I actually had to take the Lincoln over to Nitrous Ron to get this wiring finished up. So I'll walk you through that. As you know, I got the harness going on here. Down here, this is what's actually going to activate the high beams. So what I've got here, I've got a ground for the switch, and this is the hot lead that goes to the switch, which is actually going to activate this harness. So I'll show you in the car. Just ran it back through the fender. So basically what I did was pop this plug out. Had to come in and pull the trim panel out. Took all this apart, had to fish the wire through. Got the switch right here. Okay, so I had to get power and ground for this switch, which I tapped into the factory fuse panel, which is actually over here on the passenger side. So down here there's a panel, pops off of there, get your fuse box. So basically I had to run a ATA circuit, which is one of these right here. Okay, so what I did going through the owner's manual shows a fuse box, and I tapped into fuse 5, and basically I chose this because number one, it's got a 10 amp, so I've got the 10 amp fuse that goes for this circuit for the car, and then with the ATA circuit I just put a 10 amp fuse in there. So when you do this too, basically I chose that fuse area because it's key on hot. So basically what would happen is if I left the switch on and had the lights on, and then I park somewhere and I turn the car off, it'll kill those lights. So that way I'll never accidentally leave the lights on, which is probably a good idea because I'm mainly going to be using the high beams during the daytime. So I figured that was a good little safety measure to go with. So anyways, when you go to put one of these in, you want to pop it in the fuse panel and then use a test light and check whether this is hot or not, because you might actually have to flip the way this is situated inside of that fuse panel. So you put it in the fuse panel. I just grounded my test light here in the door. That actually ended up being a good ground for that. You know, you put the test light in that little connector area. it should the light should be off. When you turn the key on, you should get your test light coming on, proving that you have 12 volts. So this ATA circuit is what's powering that switch. So I ran the wire from the fuse panel from this ATA circuit over to the driver's side. So came through, came back over here, and that's wired into the switch. So that's how the switch gets 12 volts. So the switch gets the 12 volts from the fuse panel. The switch is also grounded up in here. There was some factory grounds up inside of here, so that's where it got grounded. And then when this switch is flipped, it's going to send 12 volts to that harness, which is what this cable coming through the side is. I really didn't want to run the cable this way, but really had no choice. I mean, there's really no way to get through all this. This car is pretty well built. There's quite a bit of rubber mats and whatnot. So that was kind of the path of least resistance. The other thing too is I ended up buying a different switch, because you see the switch is like, it's pretty huge. See how big that is? Like you'd have to drill out a monster hole to mount that. So I got this switch, which is, the back side of the switch is actually really thin. It's really thin compared to this. So I didn't really have to drill a huge hole to get this mounted in there. So I guess I'll show you the finished product. Alright, so now I'm going to show you basically what this harness did. So like I said, the way I wired it, the key has to be in the on position. So I'm going to have to hop in the car, turn the key to the on position, and I'll be able to fire up these high beams. So basically what this allows me to do now is, like, if I want to run my high beams during the daytime or whenever, I can just turn them on with that switch. So the other thing I can do now too is if I want to run the fog lights with the high beams, I can do that as well. So you just flip the park lights on. I can pop on the fog beam, the fog lights, and the other thing I can do now too, like if this was wired up the way the factory has it, if I was to have my low beams on with these fog lights and I turn the high beams on, I would lose the fog lights. So now what I can do is actually have everything illuminated simultaneously. So there it is. Now I can actually run all of my lights at the same time. You know, if I'm running at night and I want to flip on the high beams, I'm not going to lose those fog lights. So it's quite a tremendous amount of light output, which works out pretty good when you're rolling out in the middle of nowhere. Turned out pretty good. So yeah, that harness worked out really good. It separated the operation of the high beams and gives me a lot more flexibility with lighting.